Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel, ManojWeb, where my goal is to make your front-end life easier. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the top 5 new CSS features that you need to know. These features include the has and is selectors, which can be really helpful in certain situations and have pretty good browser support as well. That includes the nth-of syntax, which is a weird way of accessing specific elements with nth child. And then we have new dynamic viewport units such as dynamic viewport height and dynamic viewport width instead of the normal viewport height and viewport width, which we'll talk about later in the video. And then we have the initial letter property, which allows you to change the first letter much better. With just one property, you can change the first letter's height and the offset. And then finally, we have CSS nesting, the feature that every developer wanted. It can make life so much faster. Instead of having to create so many separate rules, you can do it all in one. Sure, it doesn't have much support as of right now, but the support is definitely going to continue to grow. So I hope you enjoy, and let's get started. Alright, let's get started. So first of all, let's look at the HTML. What you can see is I have different divs for each section. I have a div for the has selector, the is selector, the nth-of syntax, the initial letter, and the CSS nesting. I don't have anything for the dynamic viewport because I'll be showing that on the MD and web documentation instead of actually doing it over here because it's pretty hard to show. So I'll just be explaining the documentation itself. So without any further ado, let's get started. Let's start with the has selector. So what I have here, I'll target the has selector. Actually, let me show the HTML inside it first. So as you can see, I have 3 divs inside the has selector. Each of them have a class of box. 2 of the boxes have a div inside of it, which has the class of inner box. And 1 of the boxes has a div inside of it, which has a class of border box. I want to style the box differently based on the div that's inside it. So how can we do that? So I select the let's target the initial box first to add the initial styling. I'll give it a width of 100 pixels. I'll give it aspect ratio of 1. I'll give it a BG of red. And I'll give it a margin bottom of 20 pixels. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty decent. And I'll give it a position of relative. And what I want to do is target the inner boxes, .inner box. And what I'm going to do is make it a width of 50%, aspect ratio of 1, BG of yellow, and I'll give it a inset of 25% to center it. So 25% on all sides. Well, first I have to give it position absolute. So that centered that. Now what I want to do is for the boxes that have that inner box, I want to give it a 2 pixel solid black border. But for the box that doesn't have the inner box, I don't want to add that border because I'm going to style it differently. Because the inner box that I have inside it, the border box, that's what's going to become the border. It's going to expand when you hover on it. So what I want to do is I want to only target the first box and the last box. How can I do that? Well, that's where you get the has selector. So you can target what you want. Inside the .has selector, I want to target the box which has elements with the class of inner box. So what this will do is only target the boxes inside the .has selector class that have a class of .inner box. So only these two, the first one and the last one, because these two have a div inside it which has a class of inner box, right? So if I do that and I go here and I do border 2 pixel solid black, when I save it, you can see only the first and the last box have it because only those two have a div inside it or have an element inside it which is a class of inner box. If I were to add a paragraph here which also has a class of inner box, right, this middle one will also have it, and that box will be like that. So that's how the has selector works. It checks if an element has some kind of element inside it. Pretty simple, right? Now let's create the effect for the border box. So what I'm going to do is target the .has selector .box .border box, and what I will do is give it a width of, no, not width, I'm going to give it a position of absolute, inset of 0, bg of blue. So you can see it targets all that. Give it a z index of -1, so it's behind it. And I'll give it a transition on the inset, make it linear, and make it, let's say, 300 milliseconds. And what I can do is dot has selector dot box, which has the dot border box in it. When it's hovered, I'm going to target the dot border box which is inside it and make its inset -5%. What this will do is make it like, let me save this, -5%, like 5 pixels on the left, 5 pixels on the right, etc, etc. So that's how I do it. I'm targeting the box which has a dot border box inside it, and when that's hovered, I'm going to select the dot border box inside it and give it an inset of -5. And what I can do is change this border to a background to a linear gradient as well. To bottom right, blue to red, right? Or blue to yellow, so it's more visible. As you can see, it turns out a pretty cool effect, right? And you can increase the speed to like 100 milliseconds, let's say. Really fast. So that's how you use the has selector. And here you can see the support for the has selector within different browsers. And as you can see, it's pretty decent, but it's going to continue to gain more support over the years as well because of how good of a feature it is. And now let's move on to is selector. So in the is selector, what you can see is we have a div of box. We have a UL which has some list items and an OL inside it, or ordered list, and we have an ordered list which has some list items and an unordered list, or UL inside it. And what we want to do is use the is selector on that. So let's target that is selector, and let me separate the different divs. So what I'll do is over here I'll target the dot has selector, I think here, dot has selector, give it a border bottom of 5 pixels, double black, and I will give it a margin bottom of 20 pixels. And let me make that 10 pixels, so each of them is 5 pixels. Yeah, that's good. Now for the is selector, what I will do is first let's target the box dot is selector dot box. I'll give it a width of 100 pixels, aspect ratio of 1. Let's give it a background of, let's say, yellow, right? So I think, yeah, the box. So what else do we want to do to it? I think that's good. So let's first use the is selector with state selectors, or like other selectors. So what we can do is dot is selector dot box, which is in any of these states. So the box, if the box is a hover state, an active state, or a focus state, it will run this command, or this styling. We'll give it a background of blue. So what this is going to do is look at the box and check if it is any of these. If it is a hover, if it is at a hover state, if it is at an active state, or if it is at a focus state, it's going to change the background to blue. So if I were to save this, it changed the background to blue. If I inspect this, well, I can't do it on here because it's on VS Code. But if you were to inspect this in a force state of active or focus on it, it'll change to blue as well. Let me just add a transition so it looks better. Background color linear 300 milliseconds. Right. It changes to blue, right? Because it has those states on it. It is those states. Another thing you can do is go to the dot is selector, check if any of the elements within it are UL or OL. If an element is UL or OL, what you can do is target it, give it a color of red. See, target all of those because they are ULs and OLs. This is a separate section, but this is all UL and OL, right? And what I can do, you can even do multiple ises. So if is selector, if it's is UL or OL, and if any of those have like or is another UL or OL, which means the nested UL and OL inside that UL and OL, I'll change the background or the color of those to blue. As you can see, the nested ULs and OLs became blue because first I'm looking at the is selector. Inside the is selector, I'm looking to see if any of the elements within it are unordered list or ordered list. And within that unordered list and ordered list, if any of them are unordered list or ordered list, right? And that's how I'm deciding that. And it's going to be pretty useful. As you can see here, you can turn this massive code into this short amount of code with the is selector. As you can see, it's pretty useful. And here's the browser support for the is selector. As you can see, it's pretty good. It's basically replaced the any and the matches selectors that were here before, so it has pretty good support so far. Now let's move on to the next thing, which is, I believe, nth-of syntax. Okay, so before we do that, actually, let me just change this to target all the divs. I'll do is, if it is the hash selector, it is the is selector, nth-of syntax, dot, I forgot what it was. What was this one? Initial letter, and dot CSS nesting, which is gonna be amazing. So as you can see, it added to all of them. Now let's move on to the keep forgetting nth-of syntax. Yes, I keep going blank. Okay, so what the nth-of syntax does, it target. So let's say you want to target inside the, what's it called? You want to target an nth child, right? Let's say you want to target the second child of an element, like any second child. You want to change the color to red. So you can see these also turned red, but it turned all of them red. Oh, because all of this is covered in another div, so that turned all of them within the body. Okay, so we don't want that. What we want is, let me do a better example of this. My bad. Dot. What was it? Nth-of syntax. Nth child. So it's going to target the second child within it. But what if you don't want to target just the second child? You want to target the second instance of a different class. So what you can do is to-of dot special. Dot special is the class. What this does, to-of, is it not supported on VS Code? It was working on CodePen. Dot special. Okay, I'll show it on CodePen instead because it's not exactly working on VS Code for some reason. Maybe it's because the browser doesn't support it on here, because nth-of syntax has pretty decent support, but I guess there's still some browsers that don't support it. So over here on CodePen, what we'll do is target the nth-of dot nth-of syntax, and that's going to be over here. And I'll do the nth child within it, which is to-of dot special. Give it a color of red. Oh, I see. It's because of the nth of the syntax, because you don't need that. What you're doing, yeah, let's try that. Color red. Yeah, VS Code just isn't supported, but I'll show it over here. So what I was doing before is I was just looking for any child element which is within a parent within that dot nth-of syntax. So that would have worked if I did like nth-of syntax. So this would have worked if I do this. So if I cover all of these in a separate div, that would have worked. Command X, div dot new. As you can see, that worked now because it's a child within that element. It's pretty weird. But if I just do that, it's going to look at all the dot special elements and take the second one of those, which is a child, which is a child of the same parent. So if I have a separate group, let's say I have a div dot random, right? And I have p times 5, each saying lorem. And this one has a class of special. This one also has a class of special. What this will do is make both of these, because I'm not, to-of dot special, new. Let me get rid of this because we don't need that. Now if I save that, you can see both of these got turned red because they're both childs of the same parent and they're the second instance of it. So that's how the nth-of syntax works. Syntax refers to a selector, like a class or an ID, or well, class, because ID would just be one. It's gonna take all of the elements with that class and take the nth occurrence of it, which is a child of the same parent, with the nth child. It's pretty new itself, so we won't do that here, by the way, because it's not working on VS Code. Next, let's do the initial letter. For that, for that to work well, let me give it a max width. Give these a max width of 200 pixels so we can actually see it work well. Yep. So what we'll do to use the initial letter is go dot initial letter, target the paragraph inside it, and target the first letter inside the paragraph. Give it an initial letter property. For the first value is how many lines it's gonna take. Let's say 3 lines. The second value is how much offset it is. So if I make this 1, you'll see what happens. Save. Is this not supported either? Okay, this is not supported either. So I will do that here. If I save that. Oh wait, let me set the maximum width of that as well, so it's easier to work with. Initial letter, max width 200 pixels, right? So now as you can see, this letter, it takes up 3 lines, and it's on the first line. If I make that 0, well, I guess 0 doesn't work, but if I make that 2, it's gonna move down 1. If I make that 3, it's gonna move down 3 lines. If I make that like 30, it's just not gonna be there because it's all the way down there. It's 30 lines down. If I make that 5, it's 5 lines down. And this is how many lines it takes up. So if I make that 5, it's gonna take 5 lines, and it's 5 lines down. If I make that 1, it's gonna be a normal letter, but 5 lines down. So that's how that one works. 9, but 5 lines down. That's how initial letter works. And finally, it's time for the best feature of all, CSS nesting. In the CSS nesting section, what I have a box, and I have another box which has an inner box which has another inner box. So let's target that, right? So first let's target the boxes, just the initial boxes. CSS nesting dot box. I'll give it a width of 100 pixels, aspect ratio of 1. Give it a BG of, let's say, green this time, and give them a margin bottom of 20 pixels. So I've got those 2 boxes, and with CSS nesting, you can either select child elements of those boxes within there, or you can add like hover effects or active effects within there. So what I can do is target the top level selector with the and, do the colon, hover. So now this will happen when I hover on it. I will do the background. It's gonna become, how about yellow? And I'll give this, let's hope this works on Visual Studios, because if it doesn't, that'd be pretty sad. I'll give it a background transition. Linear 300 milliseconds. Okay, so does it not work on Visual Studio Code, or? Oh, that's sad. Okay, yes, we'll be doing this in CodePen as well. So over here, I've created the boxes. As you can see, I hover on it, the effect does happen. Because with the and, you can select the top level selector and add the effect within there. So you no longer need SCSS. You can do all of it in CSS. And you can also target elements within there. So what I can do is go here, and I have an inner box, right? Dot inner box. What I will do is give it a width of 50%, aspect ratio of 1. Right, let me give these a position of relative so I can position the boxes. Let me give this a background of yellow or orange. And I'll give this a position of absolute. give this an inset of 25%. And I'll also give this a border of 2 pixels solid white. Oh, this is targeting all the, so this is targeting all the inner boxes. What I want to do is target the direct inner box. So it's only going to target that one. And what I will do is within there, I can target another in-level element, dot inner box. Give it a width of 50% again, aspect ratio of 1, position absolute, inset of 25%, border of 2 pixels solid black, and then color, background color of yellow. So as you can see, why is the border not there? Why is the border not there though? Huh. That's weird. Everything else is there, it's just the border is not there. Oh, because the colon. Okay, yeah. That added the border. Yep. So that's how CSS nesting works. If you're interested in learning more, make sure to put any suggestions or any questions about it in the comments down below, or you can look at the MDN documentation for it. Now finally, let's move on to the Viewport display units. Developer Chrome, where it actually shows all the new features. For the dynamic viewport units, it's basically new ways of writing total vertical height. Usually when we write vertical height, it doesn't take into account the top part of the browser or like the bottom feature. So as you can see, you want 100% of the viewport height, but it doesn't account for things like retracting navigation bars. So like this section right here or this section right here, it doesn't take that into account. So sometimes it ends up too long and causes scroll. We don't want that. So there's 6 new units actually. The small viewport height, the small viewport width, the long viewport height, and the long viewport width, and the dynamic viewport height and the dynamic viewport width. So the small one will just take the smallest amount of viewport height, like while taking these into account. The large one will take the largest one while taking these into account, and the dynamic will change between the small and the long. And there's a note over here as well. It doesn't take in the presence of the virtual keyboard into account, which I don't know what it means. If you know what that means, put them in the comment. But that's pretty much it. That's how dynamic viewport unit works, and it can be pretty useful because viewport height doesn't always work well. That's pretty much it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new, and make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video, and see you next time.